And now I'd like to introduce Chris O'Brien, the state and local government leader with Guidehouse, so he can share some opening thoughts. Chris?
Thank you very much, Hillary. It is great to be here. You're coming from DC, which is absolutely tropical compared to where I'm from in Chicago. But we are so thrilled to be here. I understand that we are broadcasting to an audience of billions around the world, so let's all try and really impress them. Um, we have a really remarkable panel and group of speakers today, so I don't want to take a lot of time sort of before we get going with them. But I wanted to share a little bit of some thoughts of, by way of context, some things that I actually would like to see us get out of this conference today. Before I do that really quickly, you're probably wondering, who are these Guidehouse people? Literally everybody asks that question. So I'll say just really quickly, we are the public sector practice of PricewaterhouseCoopers, which you probably remember. We've been carved out to our own thing. We're now the largest firm of any scale serving the state and local government market. We have taken most of us from PricewaterhouseCoopers. We did not take the people who screwed up the Oscars, though, so that's, they're still there. So what I wanted to do, just to sort of give some context, as Hillary mentioned, this roadshow is really going to be a number of really sort of topical issues being addressed by cities and states in the U.S. And in many ways, this notion of resilience is really sort of the best one to start with. At Guidehouse, we've actually been working with a number of different areas that have been sort of quite heavily affected by different existential threats. We've worked with New York City, helping them recover from Sandy, with Puerto Rico, helping them recover from the hurricanes, and Houston and Joplin and other places like that. And we also spend a lot of time doing strategy and policy work for different cities. And one of the things that has kind of struck us as we've been doing this is that, this notion of resiliency, to a certain extent, when we think of the word resiliency outside of the context of our local governments, it's sort of this notion of, can you take a punch and bounce back from it? And that's really a lot of what sort of we talk about when we talk about resiliency. But one of the things that we've been sort of working through with our clients is this notion, it's better not to be punched at all, I think. So, how do you actually reposition the concept of resiliency to be more about growth, more about adaptation, and sort of creating an environment for your people going into sort of into the future. If you think sort of 100 years back or so, many of our cities came about in very different ways. Some of them came by very thoughtful planning. My city of Chicago had a very famous urban plan that, to this day we still adhere to, and people are very religious about it, to the extent that even the Obama Presidential Library runs afoul of it. And then you have other cities like Boston or New York that perhaps came about a little bit more organically. But in any event, there has been this notion of urban planning that's been sort of in our cities' backgrounds forever, and ever since we've been around. And now we're at a point, those cities were formed originally when horses walked around the street, and then sort of adapted to have cars. And now sort of we're moving into a world where perhaps there won't be cars at all, or they'll be managed in a significantly different way. The way the world operated was entirely different. The population scales and sizes were entirely different. You have some cities that have populations that are booming, LA and New York and here in Miami. You have other cities like Detroit that are way overbuilt for the populations that they currently have. So one of the things that we've been focused on is sort of, how do you broaden this notion of resiliency to be really more about creating a new urban plan? How do you actually, and an urban planning process is not something that you just sort of do one day, you write down on a piece of paper and then you execute it for the next couple of years. It's something that you actually start and you build stakeholder engagement around, and that goes on for decades and decades and decades. And, one of the things that we're really focused on is how can cities and states think about resiliency, not from this notion of absorbing a punch, but actually from positioning yourself to thrive in the world as it's given to us now. We live in an era of the sort of corporate the corporate leader coming into government and helping them resolve, sort of all these problems. Your governor, your former governor here in Florida, now your senator is a former corporate leader, and we see this at all different levels of government, where sort of people from the business world come in and sort of explain to us how great it is, to run your government like a business. But one thing that's always sort of interested me is that when you're in a corporation, you have a very clear sense of what drives value. So people understand that shareholder value is a thing that is important to manage to, and any CEO will do whatever they can do in order to improve shareholder value. But we don't have that kind of an understanding here in our local government. What actually drives value for our residents? What makes our region more valuable? And so what we've been sort of helping to position with our clients is that what makes a region more valuable for residents and businesses and visitors is some combination of improved economic vitality and broader quality of life, expanded quality of life, with some understanding of managing risk. So if you're able to actually improve economic opportunity and improve the quality of life for your residents, and also manage the risk that comes at you at any given time, you'll actually be growing the value of your communities and of your region. And so, as we think about sort of what I want to hear from today is sort of like, obviously there are important elements of resiliency around our infrastructure and around how we harden our communities to be able to absorb the punches that are invariably going to come. But it's also, sort of things like, how do we improve equity? How do we improve economic opportunity? How do we improve diversity and inclusiveness? How do we make our communities actually more resilient among each other, and as communities that can come together and build something that actually is forward-leaning and not just waiting for the next punch to hit? And the final sort of capstone to all of that is really, you can create all these things, but I think what we'll hear today is that the hard part about it is governing it all. How do you actually bring all this stuff together so the folks in the water and sewers department aren't off there operating on their own, building some set of tools that could be helpful elsewhere, but nobody else knows about it? Our great cities were, no doubt, came about in a slightly less complicated world, but what sort of unifies them is sort of decentralized activity coordinated by central vision. And that's something that I think we want to see sort of coming more and more and more into our cities as we talk about resiliency, so that we're able to actually not only just figure out how do we sort of duck and respond to punches, but how do we actually be the ones that are positioning what it means, what value means for our citizens, and create that world for them. So anyway, that's what I hope to hear a little bit more about today. Of course, this is not all about me, so let's, get at it and hear what our panelists have to say. But thank you very much for coming on behalf of Guidehouse and Route 50. This is going to be a really exciting day and a really interesting set of topics, so very eager to hear more about it. Thank you.